Hi, everyone, and welcome to another live Ethicast coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia at the 16th Annual Global Ethics Summit. We want to have a big shout out to everybody who's attending virtually from around the world. We see you, we appreciate you that you're here, and we hope you're having a great time at the event. In today's episode, I have a wonderful opportunity to speak with Mr. Gabriel here from Vectra International. You want to tell us a little bit about what you do with Vectra and what brings you to GES?
Okay, thank you, Bill, for being here today and for everybody who's sharing some time with us today. So my background is in supply chain, and we've spent over 3 decades working with suppliers on what we would call today supply chain social responsibility, ESG, trust compliance, all of those different areas.
Indeed.
So we have that as a good background and have worked with suppliers all around the world on these topics through the years. So we've been here as this topic has evolved, and now we're taking this experience and making it available to other people through Vectra International.
So, John, can you talk a little bit, when we talk about supply chain, best practices, can you talk a little bit about linking, your internal work with that of your supply chain practitioners out in the field?
Yes, that's a great question, Bill, and very important to the audience. So we heard here this week at the GES so much about the great work going on with trust, compliance, ethics internally, right? And we've heard, the mention of supply chain and cross-functional work. And it's very, very important for everybody to ensure that you do have those tight relationships.
Yeah.
Because quite often, trust compliance work may be centered in a corporate operation, and the activity with the suppliers is diversified or dispersed in procurement. So you really need to link those two functions, because most companies already have some sort of supplier environmental or social program.
Sure.
But you really want to make sure that your internal people are aware of what's going on in the supply chain and vice versa. Because for most companies, and even companies that are, say, in software services, they have a supply chain.
Yeah.
It may not occur to them, but they do.
They do.
People think products and, we're building things, parts coming from around the world, but everybody has a supply chain. And you really want within your company to ensure your internal programs are aware of what's going on in the supply chain and vice versa, and that you're learning from each other.
Yeah.
You may have some shared KPIs, or if they're different, you at least know what they all are.
Yeah.
And that way you're communicating consistently within your company and to your shareholders and stakeholders. So that's the importance of really developing those relationships.
Yeah.
So if you don't have those, please go out and build those.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you another question, John. It's been impossible to talk about supply chain recently without mentioning artificial intelligence almost in the same breath.
Right.
So I would love, as somebody who's a supply chain expert first and an AI expert second, I'd love to get your ideas on what are your thoughts on the integration of AI in terms of reaching best practices with supply chain, meeting the current challenges that supply chain is posing, and what the future looks like.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, but one that we could probably spend hours on.
Oh, for sure.
But we'll net that down. AI is a wonderful tool.
Yeah.
But it is a tool, right? And it's not a substitute for having a good, solid process with your supply chain to begin with.
Right.
We've talked at some of the breakouts here today. One of the benefits of what AI is going to give us is the ability to manage and learn from and interpret vast amount of data from the supply chain.
Yeah.
Today, most of us in this field get that, but it's in silos or it's in pieces, right? You can scrape the internet. You can scrape different things about, natural disasters around the world. But how do you put all that together in a fashion that's keeping up with the pace of day-to-day business?
Yeah.
Right. So it's hard to do that without something like AI or even generative AI in the future.
Yeah.
Now, the thing you have to be careful with, though, is that you just don't jump to that as the answer without knowing you've got good data streams coming in, either from external sources or your supply chain, right? So we've talked about the importance of knowing your supply chain, mapping it, and then putting the data through some sort of a funnel to be able to come up with meaningful information that then you can work with providers of AI to do something practical with it for you, and help you bring that back to make your business more resilient and more sustainable.
So when we're talking about implementing AI and kind of integrating it into your supply chain protocols, what kind of time horizon are we talking about here for the actual implementation? And are there milestones along the way that organizations can look to as, as interim success points to make sure that their progress is what they need it to be?
Yeah, for sure. And the answer there is going to be a function of how big is your supply chain, how complex is it, what are you bringing in? So the approach that I've had experience with, and that Vectra also does with clients, is you really need to start with knowing your supply chain, mapping it out, and that activity there may take a year to really do it honestly, right? To get to at least your tier ones, and in some cases tier 2 or 3. And then being able to look at that and categorize that as like, you would then start to know your inherent risks. Right. Then you've got to look at your program maturity.
Sure.
Almost every company's been working on this to some degree, but how mature really are you? And then the delta of that could be your residual risk. Now that residual is really where you'd have that ability to then start to apply AI to your residual risk and use that as the ability to then harvest information and help you move forward. Now, that whole process, again, it could take a couple of years to really work your way through it. Now, part of the trick of this would be too, is you might say, well, geez, I got 20,000 suppliers. How can I do all this in that period of time? Well, you're going to go through a process of kind of necking that down to your pinch point suppliers. Right. In certain industries, it's known who kind of those pivot point suppliers are. But if you don't know it, you get to that point. So you may only be working with, say, 10, 15, 20% of your total supply chain, and then using them as, they are really the most pivotal companies in your extended enterprise. And then they're going to be the ones that, as you look at an AI tool, that you'll be working with information coming, from those suppliers or emanating from a group or a constellation of suppliers.
Well, look, it's been impossible to not notice the news today as global markets have been going a little crazy because we have a full-blown tariff war underway now. One imagines this will wreak no small amount of havoc among standing supply chains. Everybody's trying to figure out what's the best way they can optimize their supply chain. And I imagine in a moment like this, everybody has an opportunity to kind of reevaluate what they're doing, how their supply chain works, where they can find efficiencies, where they can address inefficiencies or problems. So with that in mind, I'd love to know, what are some ways in which you see organizations that sometimes get in their own way or kind of create unforced errors when it concerns how they manage their supply chain, and especially like the due diligence aspects of it?
Yeah, well, the current world we're living in is very disruptive. But this has been a pattern over the last 10 years, really. When you look at back, we had the pandemic, which was something we never thought we'd have.
True.
For those of us who were in the business, that became a major disruptive world event where, you knew your supply chain, you knew your paths, but nobody was thinking that would happen. But when it did, companies that were prepared had proactive plans in place to deal with it. Similarly, you fast forward to tariffs, right, which are now, changing rapidly, moving from country to country. So, if you hadn't thought that out in advance, you're somewhat now in reactive mode.
Sure.
And probably almost everybody is to some degree, but you want to be able to think ahead in this field, right? And maybe that's where, as things evolve, AI may be more of a tool to help with that, right? Because, what's the next disaster or business impact that we haven't yet thought of?
There always is
we
one.
said will never happen, right?
Exactly.
We'll never have to worry about this.
It'll happen.
Well, it'll happen, right? That's always in this area where you want to be looking forward to not just today's crisis, but what could happen in the future.
Indeed. Well, John, I sure appreciate you coming on the Ethicast and sharing your insights with us so much. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people go to learn more about what you're talking about?
Well, In particular, Vectra is available. We're also partnering with Ethisphere and Control Risks. So we're developing a tool right now, and will be general announced very shortly, that will allow companies to do some of the things we talked about. Look at your inherent risks, look at your program maturity, and then look at your areas of remedial risk. So you can contact Vectra International, get more information on that. My email is john@vectra-intl.com, and we'd be more than happy to get in touch and continue the dialogue with anybody who's tuned in here today.
Fantastic. Well, John, thank you so very much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
It's been
Bill.
a real pleasure. Everyone out there, thank you very much for watching. This has been another live Ethicast episode coming to you from Atlanta, Georgia at the 16th Annual Global Ethics Summit. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.
Thank you.